Good afternoon or morning, everybody, depending on where you are. As Lynn said, my name is Danyale Sturdivant, and I'm going to be talking with you all today about moving from family engagement to family partnership. When I present, I like for it to be interactive. So if you have any questions or any comments or anything that moves you, please feel free to jump right in. And on our agenda, I'd just like to know who's in the room. So if you all would do me a favor and go around and very quickly, maybe state who you are and where you work. Again, if you have to step away or if you need to take care of yourselves, please do that. We're going to talk today about self-awareness and cultural humility. We're also going to talk about cultural responsiveness, and we're going to talk about family engagement and home visits. And then we're going to talk about how self-awareness is really the gateway to how we work with the families that we serve. So the objectives are, we're going to define self-awareness and implicit bias and explore ways that self-awareness and implicit biases are connected. We're going to acknowledge self-awareness as the gateway to understanding implicit bias because there is a connection there. We're going to define cultural competency, and we're going to also define and talk about cultural humility. We're going to define family engagement and home visits. And what we really want to do, or what I really want you all to do, is understand the intersection between family engagement and home visits. And that's how we move to family engagement. So self-awareness. What is self-awareness? And we all have our own definitions. And of course, there are definitions that are written. But for me, when I think about self-awareness and I think about myself and how I view myself, for me, self-awareness is understanding my thoughts, my actions, and or my emotions, and how they are aligned or not aligned with my belief systems, and then how my thoughts, actions, emotions affect other people. So when I think about self-awareness, I always think about where I am in the space and how I am and how I interact with other people. And you all may have your own different definitions of self-awareness. So what I want you to do is, as we move through the presentation, I want you to think about your definition of self-awareness and what it actually means to you. Okay, so implicit bias, we've all heard the term. We all know that there's this thing out there, and we all know that we have them. But sometimes it's difficult to think about how our self-awareness, how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with others, how that affects our implicit biases. So implicit bias is also known as unconscious or hidden biases because sometimes we're not even aware that we actually have them. So unconscious or hidden biases, implicit biases are negative associations that people unknowingly hold. The key word here is that people unknowingly hold these biases. They're expressed automatically without conscious awareness. Many studies have indicated that implicit biases affect individuals' actions and attitudes, thus creating real-world implications, even though individuals may not even be aware that those biases exist. So we could have an implicit bias about something and we're not even aware of it. And sometimes people think we are, but most of the time we're really not aware of it, and it's just some bias that we may have had. And there are many, there are plenty, and we will do some exercises later on as we move through the PowerPoint to kind of bring some of this home. Even though individuals may not even be aware that those biases exist within themselves, notably implicit biases have been shown to trump individuals' shared commitment to equality and fairness, thereby producing behavior that diverges from explicit attitudes that many people possess. So when we talk about implicit biases, I may feel one way as an individual and think that I am 100% spot on with my feelings about someone or something. My implicit bias may creep in, and I don't know that they creep in and trump the way I really feel. So how I think I present versus how I actually present. And that's where the difference lies. Does anybody have any questions about that or thoughts on that? Because I think that's really, really an important concept to think about. Implicit biases have been shown to trump individual stated commitments to equality and fairness. So I might think I'm a fair person, but I may have some implicit biases that I've grown up with that cause me to not recognize when I'm not being fair or I'm treating someone equally. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about that they'd like to share?
I just wanted to share that this is an important concept. We've had a lot of training surrounding implicit bias here in LA County. So yeah, such an important thing to also consider, because we might think that, you know, like you said, we're not biased, but then we have those inherently, you know, just things that we've grown up with, our lenses, our, you know, just what we've grown up with.
Yes, and it's not anything wrong. It's just kind of who we are. And that's where self-awareness comes in. And that's why self-awareness then becomes so very important. Because if we center ourselves and we know where we are and we know what our thoughts are and we're able to identify our implicit biases, then we're able to kind of move outside of that and look at the picture or look at people in a different way. And we all, you know, we all have them. We all have them. I'm from the North, but I lived a great deal of time, spent a great deal of time in the South. And one of the things that people would say to me all the time is, "You're so nice to be a Northerner." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And they thought that was a compliment, but really it's kind of not, but they thought it was. But the bias would be that people from the North are rude or loud or all of these other things. And they didn't mean it, you know, it's just that, you know, where they fit. So, you know, we all have them. If we're self-aware, then we're able to identify them, and then they don't become a big problem, and they don't become a barrier to the work that we are responsible for doing, you know, with the families and the consumers that we serve. Next slide. Okay. So what does implicit bias mean to you? And I have a Jamboard activity. And for those of you who have not done a Jamboard, it's an activity where you can actually write the definitions and stick them on the board. And then we can kind of talk about what those are. So I am going to pull up my Jamboard, and if I could share my screen. Okay. So again, this is a Jamboard, and there are sticky notes over here to the side, if you can see my arrow. And you just kind of click on the sticky note. You can pick whatever color you want, and you can just kind of save it to the screen, and it will add the information to the screen.
Can you remind us of the question, please?
Sure. What does implicit bias mean to you? Sorry, I should have had that somewhere on the top. And you can just, like I said, use this little tab here, the sticky note, and you can just kind of plaster them to the screen. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. The young lady that just spoke had a great definition. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just what it means to you. Okay, these are great. Yeah, gut reactions to situations, unconscious attitudes and beliefs, negative thoughts or feelings that you have toward people or things you're not aware of, opinions or feelings. Yeah, these are great. Underlying drivers to thank you. Underlying drivers to decision making. Unconscious ways we see the world. The ideas and beliefs that I grew up with, and I filter the way I view the world. Oh, this is a good one. Discriminative actions that occur automatically and unintentionally. These are really good ones. Having unintention. Not sure where that one was going. Okay, we have about another 30 seconds on this. Okay, I'm going to stop share in the interest of time and give it back to you, Farah. Thank you for that. So do you all see, based on your own definition of implicit bias, how important self-awareness is? Do you see the connection between implicit bias and self-awareness? And if you are able to make that connection, does anybody want to share any thoughts they have off the top of their head just by hearing, thinking about self-awareness and the definition of implicit bias? And don't be shy, this is interactive, so it just makes it. Nobody? No, not one brave soul wants to share?
Feel free to use the chat as well. We'll be reading out those
Absolutely.
responses.
Definitely use the chat, yes. It's like there's some. And just let me know if something turns up in the chat. So we've talked about self-awareness. We have a good understanding of what that is. We've talked about implicit bias. We know how important it is to have self-awareness when we're thinking about our implicit biases. And you all came up with some very good Jamboard definitions of implicit bias. So one of the things that I think is really important, and I want you all to, I'm trying to move my toggle this. One of the things I want you all to remember is that while we all have implicit biases, implicit bias combined with privilege and authority take on a new meaning. So implicit, when we combine implicit bias with privilege and authority, it gives professionals the power to determine the type of representation parents and consumers will get. Let me say that again. Implicit bias combined with privilege, whatever your privilege is, and my privilege would be the fact that I am a social worker. So that gives me some privilege to a degree. So my privilege and my authority over the families that I work with gives me the power to determine the type of representation they get. So for example, back when I started out, just like my youthful appearance, I've been doing this for about 20 years. Back when I started, I used to work in foster care, and one of the things that we used to call families and we used to call parents all the time is non-compliant. So if Miss X had a meeting and Miss X didn't meet with me, we considered Miss X to be non-compliant. Now, one of the things that we never considered was Miss X's ability to actually get to the office and meet with me. The fact that Miss X had children that were in the system. Miss X was a single parent. Miss X was working. And again, this is where the implicit biases show up. And my lack of self-awareness back then did not allow me to think about Miss X in something other than what we defined parents as back then as non-compliant, without looking at the big picture and seeing all of the other factors that, you know, that this person had going on in their lives. And again, as we grow and we learn, we start to really think about how our position of power, even though sometimes as social workers or people that work with families, we don't see ourselves as having power or privilege. We do. When you have the ability to walk into someone's home and remove a child and place them someplace else, you have power and you have the privilege to actually, and the authority actually, to actually do that. So again, remember that implicit bias combined with privilege and authority give professionals the power to determine the type of representation parents and consumers will get. What we write, what we document, what we think, whether it's based on a fact or our own implicit biases, definitely affect the way that we interact with parents and the services that parents get. Again, we know that implicit bias is unconscious, so it's not like anybody's doing anything on purpose. It's just kind of what it is and how we have to move differently and think about and be aware of it.
There are a few comments
Sure.
in the chat box that are relevant to what you're talking about. Janet Hecky says, I was completely unaware of how other people experience the world. It's different from me. Seems crazy, but until someone showed me how others experience the world, I just figured everyone saw things the way I did. Pimentel says implicit bias is internally driven, and our ideas or beliefs that we hold and account for when we're engaging or experiencing others. Explicit is when we use those ideas or beliefs and act on them, decisions included.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we are products of how we grew up, you know, and it's really hard when you grow up a certain way, thinking a certain thing, to then go back and try to retract and rethink and relearn the things that we've learned growing up. It's a task. And that's why self-awareness, again, tying it all the way back to self-awareness and why that's so important. Oh, cultural competence. Ooh, we know this one. We hear this all the time. So cultural competence is the ability to successfully teach students who come from a culture or families from a culture or other cultures other than our own. So that means, because I'm culturally competent, I'm going to throw this word around because it's been thrown around so much. What this definition is saying is, I don't necessarily have to know who you are, Lynn. I don't have to know anything about you or your culture. Because of who I am, I know who you are and you don't even have to tell me. I'm just going to go on what I know. And a lot of it may be implicit biases, but I don't even need to know who you are. I'm just going to go on what I know, because obviously I have the authority and the power and I must be right, right? And so we throw this word around and we say cultural competence, but is it really possible? And I want you all to think about this. Is it really possible to be culturally competent? Is that even a possibility? Or are we setting ourselves up and using it as a barrier to really think about and move outside of our comfort zone to find out who people are? So keep the definition of cultural competence in your mind, because to me, cultural competence says I know who you are. I don't have to ask you any questions. You know, I'm coming to your house. I read your file. I don't really need to know anything about you. I get it. You know, I have a friend like you. So I understand. I get it. That, in my opinion, is not the best way to be. And some of you probably have some good definitions too. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Jamboard, and you know where I stand with it, but I want you to come up with your own definitions. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so mine is, I know who you are. I don't really need any explanation. So what are some of the things that when you think about cultural competence, or things that you've heard about cultural competence, what does it mean to you? And you don't have to, you can totally disagree with me. I'm just speaking from my standpoint. So I'll go ahead and put mine. And please feel free to add yours. And as you're thinking about cultural competence, one of the other things I want you to think about is think about your own families, and think about if someone were coming to your own home to talk with you or your parent or your loved one about something, and they're saying things like I just said, you know, I know who you are, I get it, I don't need any additional information. Saying or thinking you understand someone's experience, that's a big one. And I'll give it about another minute.
Could you say again what the definition is? Like, because I wrote down that your slide said abilities to successfully teach students who come from another culture or cultures other than your own. You know, I work in
Yes,
public
or
health, that's
families.
not really teaching.
Yeah, so families or working with, I should have said teaching or working with families. Assuming what you think is important is universal. Yeah, open to learning and understanding. I think there's one back here, but I didn't. Yeah, what does cultural competence mean to you? And this is your own definition. It doesn't have to be mine. Stepping aside and allowing families to be experts in their own culture. I'm in a learning role. Okay, so I'm gonna save this one, because this one fits better with another definition that I have. Listening to others. I'm gonna put that over here. Okay. So I'm going to give you another definition, and I want you to think about the difference. I know a little bit about some cultures, and always we're going to learn more. Okay. That's something on here.
So Danielle, there's a question here from Ashley. She said she guesses she's confused. Successfully working with someone from another culture seems possible, but not by assuming you understand their experience, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what do and I'm gonna put myself in the hot seat here. I'm not gonna assume that you all do this, but I'm gonna tell you what I did as a young social worker. One of the things that I did is I would read the file, and then I would have this picture in my head. And then when I went to work with the family, I would use that picture in my head of who I thought they were, because, you know, I went to school, I know this stuff, I've read this stuff. I don't really need to hear anyone's story. And what I'm trying to get you all to see is the error in that thinking and the work that we do. Can we pull the slides back up? And I'm going to give you another definition, and then I want you all to compare the two and tell me which one you think is better or fits better with what we're talking about. So the other definition is cultural humility. Now, this is the one that I prefer. So cultural humility is the practice of self-reflection on one's own background and on the background of others. And it impacts teaching, learning, research, creative activity, engagement, leadership. It is the commitment to work individually and with others to end unjust power imbalances. Now, do you all see the difference between cultural competence that says, I got this, I know who you are, I don't have to ask you any questions, and cultural humility who says, teach me, I don't know, I have some ideas, but I want you to tell me who you are. And for the person that put allowing families to be the expert in their own experiences, that is the definition really of cultural humility. So not only are you working on yourself individually, but you're also working with others so that you can end that power imbalance. And for those of you who don't really think that there is a power imbalance, when you work with families, whether the families look like you or they don't look like you, there is an imbalance of power. And who do you all think holds that power?
White individuals.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Generally white individuals, people in positions of
Absolutely.
power. Yeah.
Absolutely. So imagine, and I'm sorry, I can't see who's speaking, but imagine you're going to this home of this family, and it doesn't have to be a Black family, just a family of color, and you are practicing, your thought is cultural competence, and you're saying, I know who you are, and I'm just going to tell you kind of what you need to do. Versus going to that same family and saying, I don't have a lot of information about your family. Yes, I read the file. I don't have a lot of information. What can you share? Can you all see the difference in that? So when we're saying we're culturally competent and we have it all together and we know it, we don't need any help, we need nothing from the family but them to sit there and listen to us, that's not where we want to be. We want to be on the side of cultural humility where we're able to build those partnerships. And this is a part of how we build partnerships. When we say to a family, and when we're in their house because we're respecting them or we're in their space, I'm going to give you an opportunity to teach me, and I'm actually going to listen, and I'm not going to listen with my preconceived notions, and I'm not going to listen with my implicit biases, but I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to try to understand your experience so that I may help you. That's where the partnership starts. Now, again, back in the day when I was a social worker starting out, we just came up with things for families to do. And we just went to the homes and we said, you have to do these things. And if they didn't do them, we said, well, so-and-so's non-compliant. And we just, said it. That's kind of how it was. And I'm not making excuses. That was kind of the way it was. And it wasn't about cultural competence. It wasn't about cultural humility. It was just about getting the work done and doing what we thought was the best for families back then. But as I have evolved and have grown, I can see where cultural humility is really important, and being able to listen before I respond, and sometimes just listen and sit with the family where they are so that I can learn from them and practice cultural humility. Does anybody have any questions? I think I see some.
Yeah, there are a couple of comments here.
Sure.
An example of the importance of case-by-case practices.
Absolutely.
From a program perspective, the systems also hold power.
Definitely.
Oftentimes clients say the system or state took my child and not a specific person.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And having been out there on the side of someone's taking a child, they've always pinpointed me specifically. They've never had a problem getting in my personal space specifically about taking their child, because obviously as the person coming out there to actually do that. And again, even in that, for me, if I had to remove a child, and some of you may agree and some of you may not, and it can be dangerous. So don't do anything that you don't feel comfortable doing. One of the things I always tried to do, even though I didn't know what I was practicing, I always wanted to talk to the families and kind of give them an explanation. Now, some families you couldn't do that because you risk your life, literally. But other families that were more emotional that I could actually, kind of talk with, I always wanted to talk with them about what was happening and why. And I usually, would do that starting with the first visit and kind of move forward so that they knew that I was a mandated reporter. They knew that if I suspected child abuse or, neglect or any of those things, they knew that I would have to report them. And sometimes it worked out well for me, and other times I had to hightail it to my car pretty quickly. It just, that's kind of the way it worked, but I always wanted to give the family at least that, so that they don't think I'm sneaking in, watching them, and then going back and reporting. I always wanted to be as honest as possible with that. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone has? Okay,
Nothing.
next slide.
Nothing in the chat at the moment.
Next slide. Okay, so here we go. What do self-awareness and implicit bias have to do with cultural humility, Danielle? I mean, I know you said self-awareness, I know you said implicit bias, but what does it have to do with cultural humility? Self-awareness alerts you to how your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions are aligned or misaligned with your belief system. Your belief system may be connected to implicit biases that you are not aware that you have. So I think we talked about that earlier. Having implicit biases that are unaddressed does not allow you to acknowledge cultural humility. Does anybody have a question about that? Do you see that? If you have implicit biases that are unaddressed, you know about them, they're unaddressed, then you're not going to be able to practice cultural humility, because cultural humility says, I want to learn from you, teach me, and tell me who you are. Does anybody have any questions about that connection? And I'm talking about unaddressed implicit biases, not the ones that you know that you have, not the ones that kind of pop their heads up, you know, when you were working with a family. I'm talking about the ones that we know that we refuse to address. Does anybody have any questions?
Sorry. So I wanted to just be sure that I'm understanding the cultural competence from your perspective, which was, I wrote down the ability to successfully teach students who come from another culture or cultures other than your own. And I think in and of itself that I'm understanding is that definition's not a problem, but the fact that like how we approach cultural can be a problem, because then if you know these little things that you think you know about another culture, then you can go in and assume that you know everything.
Absolutely.
So in and of itself, it shouldn't be negative, but it turns out that way often.
Because of our implicit biases. Absolutely. I mean, you may feel like you're culturally competent, but if you think about all the different cultures in the world and all the nuances, how's that even possible?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from one family to the next, from one even group to the next, how's that even possible? And when we go in with the thought that, I got this, I know, you can tell me, but I pretty much have this, then we miss the whole picture. I cannot tell you all how many times and how many mistakes I've made throughout my years as a social worker when I thought I was practicing cultural competency because I thought I knew this family. And I thought I knew, and sometimes it was families that looked like me. You know, there was an assumption that we all do this.
Yeah.
And guess what? We all don't do that. We all don't do that at all. And it's just one of those, I think, human errors that we make because we become too familiar. And when we start to think that we're familiar, then we kind of overlook and we don't see, you know, different things in certain things. I think that's kind of the point I'm trying to make with that. That everything is fresh eyes, everything is new, everything is, I want to learn, everything is tell me about who you are. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, how can I use cultural humility to help with family engagement? We can do that through parent conferences. If you're working with children or in the school system or wherever you work and you're meeting with a parent, you can start with, tell me who you are. Tell me about yourself. You know, asking those open-ended questions. Cultural humility with families. When you go into a family's home, don't just plop down in the chair. Wait to be invited in. Ask where to be seated. Allow them to kind of guide you. I have tons of stories where, as a new social worker, I would go into the home and plop down in a chair, and it was a chair that nobody sat in because it was dad's chair or somebody, you know, somebody's chair that I actually sat in. You know what I mean? But me, again, using my privilege as a social worker, and when I thought I had authority, using that to just kind of go on in and want to get to work. Some families, you have to break the ice. You know, you kind of have to wait to be invited in. You have to kind of watch and see who's in charge. You know, who do you address? Who do you talk to? Who's doing most of the talking? Who's silent? Why are they silent? Just all of these different things. You can also do that through meetings, trainings, and our documentation. You all, the way we write, we sometimes don't even think about some of the things that we write. Like back when I was writing, you know, resistant, You know what I mean? Or non-compliant. If I knew then what I know now, of course, hindsight's 2020, the effects that those words might have on a family long term, I probably would have changed my language. I probably would have asked more questions to the family to engage them. You know, Miss X, I know that you missed our appointment. Can you tell me about why? And I might have gotten a story there, and I might have gotten something that helped me connect better with the family. But these are things that you learn as you go along, and hopefully somebody can learn it a lot quicker than I did. That's where cultural humility comes in, and that's how that helps with family engagement. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, family engagement and home visits defined. Whether this is your first home visit, your 100th home visit, the importance of home visit etiquette and things to consider. And I know that with COVID, we haven't been doing a lot of home visits, but this can actually work if you're doing virtual work as well, because again, you're inviting yourself or being invited into someone's personal space. Okay, so what is family engagement? You know, you've heard me talk about it. Family engagement is the process used to build genuine relationships with families. Genuine. So do you all see how cultural humility comes into this? When we're talking about a partnership, can we really have and build a genuine relationship if I have the authority over the family, or I think I do? Does anybody think that might work? Or can we build, is it better to build engagement with kind of on equal footing and as partners? So family engagement is the process used to build genuine relationship with families. Relationships with families support overall family well-being and children's healthy development. When families are engaged, partnerships are created that have a common focus, helping children grow and thrive. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that and the importance of the genuine relationship? And sometimes we don't want to have genuine relationships because we feel like we are, again, in a position of power and that we have privilege and that we are not able to do that. But there are ways to build genuine relationships with families. And one of those ways that I've always practiced is honesty, being honest, listening, allowing them, as someone said earlier, to be the expert on their own children, not over talking them, hearing them out. Sometimes I have to tell you guys, I've been cursed out and put out probably more times than anybody in the room. Sometimes allowing them to vent and be angry for whatever reason, but then coming back, showing back up. I don't know about you all, but for me, one of the hardest things that I had to do after being thrown out was to show back up and try to have that same conversation. These are the ways that we engage families. And I had one family tell me that they just wanted to see if I was actually going to stick around or if I was going to, you know, try to transfer their case to somebody else because someone else had done that to them in the past. So this, you know, anger, I'm not saying it wasn't real, but it was kind of like a test. And when we think about those tests that when we're working with families, a lot of times once we pass them, then we can start to build that genuine relationship. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, home visits, my faves. So again, although we are not doing, I don't know if you all are back to doing home visits or if you do home visits at all, but when I think about home visits, even if you're doing a virtual visit, you should consider that a home visit because you're actually engaging with someone that is actually in their home, even though you're not physically there. So home visits are an opportunity to engage and be a part of someone's life. Home visits are an opportunity to observe someone in their natural environment. And I know sometimes it's hard to see if you're on Zoom and you're kind of peeking and looking, but you can always ask questions. Home visits are necessary to understand if someone's safe in their home. They're an opportunity to assess someone's needs and supports. They're an opportunity to assess for food insecurities. They're an opportunity to provide services and supports to families in need. They're an opportunity for you to examine your self-awareness. Remember, we talked about self-awareness and what could help you be more self-aware than being in someone's home or being in someone's personal space. They're also an opportunity to practice cultural humility, and they're an opportunity for you to practice active listening. So when we think about family engagement and we think about that building that genuine relationship that we want to build with families, one of the things we have to know is we have to be able to listen actively. And we're not listening to respond, we're actually listening to understand. Does that make sense? Or does somebody have any questions about that? And I guess I should ask, is anybody doing home visits anymore? Are you all doing any? Or community visits anymore? Oh, you still do home session? Okay, yes. So Rihanna and someone else, I think I just saw. So does this resonate with you all when we think about home visits and we think about our opportunity to engage and be a part of someone's life? For me, I always liked home visits because, again, it gave me an opportunity to really connect with the family, build with the family, and it also gave me an opportunity to check for things. Like, I don't know about you all, but very rarely does someone say, I don't have any food in the house. But you may be able to go in the house and see, maybe with a scan, what the situation is, and then you're able to kind of offer support. The other thing about home visits is, again, it builds relationships. So for me, when I do home visits, I always find something genuinely to compliment the family on. I think that when I do that, it shows them that I see them for who they are, and I see that there is some good in them, because a lot of times the families we work with, you all, they've been so beaten down, they don't have a lot to feel good about sometimes. And if we can compliment them on something that we think that they're doing well, I think that definitely helps us when we become engaged with them further on. Oh, and again, a home visit is also an opportunity for you to be aware of your implicit biases. And that's another big one. You may think that each child should have their own room, for example, and these kids may all be in one room. Or you may think that, whatever it is, whatever your thoughts are, this is a great time to examine those thoughts and really start thinking about what they are and how to address them so that you can move forward and progress with the families that you're working with. Oh, this is my favorite. So home visit etiquette. I told you all that I've made some big bloopers when I've gone into homes. But remember, you are a professional guest in someone's home. And again, when we think about cultural competence, or we think about our privilege that some of us don't think we have, but we kind of do when we're working with families. When we think about our privilege and our authority, we have to remember that we are a professional guest in someone's home. Like I told you all, I always ask, where should I be seated? And I've started to ask, do I need to take my shoes off? Because I found out that's a thing and I didn't know that. Ensure that you know how and who to address in the family. Again, some families, the father or the male figure may not say much. And the female may do all of the talking. Don't automatically assume that he's just disinterested or he's not involved in the process. It may just be the way that their family is structured. Allow families to be the experts in their own homes. And for some people, and we talk about culture and cultural humility, think carefully before you refuse food or drink, because in some cultures that's highly offensive, and you're probably not going to be able to really connect and engage with families. The other thing that I want to caution you about is I want you to always know who is actually in the home. For those folks who said that they do home visits, please always remember to find out who's in the home. I've been in several homes where I'm actually working with a family and someone is somewhere in the back and they come from the back and I had no idea they were in the house. The other thing, for those of you that maybe have just started home visits, please mind where you sit, what you bring into the home, and always keep your line sight. I was in a situation where the family was getting very upset with me. I told you all I had been cursed out and put out of homes. So it wasn't necessarily that. That didn't really alarm me. What alarmed me was when people started coming out of various areas. If you have your cell phone, it's always a good practice to have a coworker or your supervisor on standby. And I was able to text my supervisor and say something like, call me, whatever the code is, have some password or code that you use that you can type in or use on your phone. And when my supervisor called me, I said, oh, I'm sorry. There's an emergency at the office and I need to leave. And that was my way to kind of exit out safely. Think about the way that your car is parked, what direction your car is parked in. And for those of you in the South, if somebody, I think somebody's on here from Charlotte, you know, rural North Carolina. I worked in rural North Carolina where there are no street lights and there are no signs. And when you're going out to do a visit and there's nothing, you can't see anything in front of you, you always want to have somebody around that knows where you are, what time you're going. Obviously, you can't give the address, but you can just say, I'm going to this, you know, place and this is what I'm going to do. If ever you don't feel safe in a home, try to meet in a neutral location. And those are my home visit safety tips. So today we've talked about self-awareness, implicit bias, cultural competency versus cultural humility, family engagement, and home visits. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to share or anything they'd like clarification on? Let's see. I'm sorry. I see some.
So there's a question about if the slide deck will be available to us. Yes, there'll be a PDF of it on the WebEx app. Maybe not today, but within the next couple days. And then Chelsea is giving her experience that they always had backup during night home visits. She's in North Carolina now, but she was in Georgia before. And we would have to let a supervisor know if we went out while we were on call.
Definitely.
And Haley says, thank you.
You're welcome. And you all, I've actually put some resources in at the end if you all want to look at any of these resources. The racial equity tools is a really good one for anybody that's interested in that. So special thanks to TCOM, of course, and the University of Kentucky for having me. And I also want to thank my son, Joshua Sturdivant, for giving me the courage to do the work that I'm doing and to share family engagement. He's been just a beacon and allowed me the opportunity to really think about what I do and how to engage families. So just a quick disclosure, I actually have a son on the autism spectrum, and I had worked with children in various systems for years before I had my son. And only when I had him and had to engage in family services for myself did I truly understand the importance of connecting with families, building with families, and family engagement. And again, I have an organization called Living Autism Out Loud. And the purpose of my organization is to help BIPOC families engage in services. So please feel free to check out my website. And if you need to email me, you can definitely email me. You guys are all welcome. You guys have been great. And hopefully they can have a copy of the Jamboard to keep that in mind when they're actually working with their families and doing their work. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, consider cultural humility versus cultural competency. And let me know how that works out for you in the future. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.